dust now settled on the Goldman Sachs issue, do you think?
I think it has. I think that the shock initially of it has worn off. I think people realise that maybe Goldman Sachs might not even be sued or investigated properly by the SEC. I think really what we have to wait and see is, are they going to look at other companies, and is there going to be regulatory points that are going to be put in place for companies and banks going forward. So I think Goldman Sachs themselves are up about 1.8% today. People coming back to buy that stock, and they will be reporting their earnings, which should be very good later today.
Well, just taking a look at some of the earnings we have seen coming through, because of course Citi came through last night with its earnings, doubled its profits. Last week we had JP Morgan profits up by 55%. So the banks in particular are really coming through with strong results. But some would say that this is really from trading activities and really not from lending activities.
I think on the lending side, on the bad debt side, their bad debts are definitely improving, and they haven't got as much losses. And the losses are getting less and less on that side, so that's very promising for the banks. Obviously, the market's had a very big rally, and that's helping the banks increase their earnings on the trading side, definitely. So a lot of it is on the trading side, a lot of it is cost cutting as well. But generally, the fundamentals that we see coming through the markets are starting to filter through to earnings, and companies like Citigroup, we'll have IBM later out today. And the earnings are starting to look quite firm across the board. So I think the fundamentals are starting to show in the earnings of the companies that have been putting out earnings this week. 135 companies in the S&P 500 will be reporting this week alone.
Well, of course, we know that in the last earnings season, most of those companies beat expectation. Is that the feeling we're getting this time around again, that most of the companies reporting back will be beating expectations? And in that case, are expectations still too low?
I think companies will beat expectations. We're looking for about 30% increase in earnings going across the board. So it is quite a big number. But so far the companies are showing earnings increasing. In the last quarter, a lot of those earnings that were beaten were just by cost cutting alone, and so it was slightly inflated earnings. But the earnings coming through now look like it is bottom line and real earnings coming through as well. Which is very positive. And I think if 135 companies, if we get 80% of those companies better than expected earnings, it will justify where we are in the market and this big run, and then we can move forward from there.
Of course, another positive move is lots of the airlines starting to fly again. We've had some of the bans lifted on airlines across Europe. But of course, those airlines must have taken massive pain over the past week.
Definitely. I think they say they're losing up to about $300 million currently, and that could get worse. But so far the skies look like they're opening up, and we'll see flights going through into Europe again. There's also a lot of companies around the world that are exporting goods into Europe, and that exportation is done through flying and through planes. So it's actually quite a broad impact around the world. So the quicker those airlines get going, the better for the world economy as well.
Apart from those positive earnings numbers we're seeing coming through from the United States, we've also had some fairly positive economic data as well. Consumer sentiment improving in Japan. The US leading indicator also higher than expected when it was reported last night. So the economic picture also looking reasonably positive, Rob.
Yes, all the indicators are looking very good. The one indicator that we're looking at is jobs and unemployment. That number really hasn't come down that much in the United States, still sitting at unemployment of about 9.7%. And that's the number that everybody needs to change. We need to see that unemployment level moving lower, down to about 8%, and then the recovery will really be able to start and get that extra kick. Often that's why you start to see profit taking. When there's a bit of jitters, you see how the market sold off quite aggressively since Friday, and then resettles. And I think really what we're looking for is the unemployment numbers around the world to start to improve.
Of course, while we're seeing the US earnings coming through, we're also getting a taste of what earnings are looking like here in South Africa. We've had a couple of companies reporting today. Altech results, dividend up 5%, and its revenue flat, but operating profit looking reasonably healthy.
Yes, I think the numbers are a little bit disappointing. The dividend increase in the dividend is very positive, but generally they need to find some growth in their markets. Their cash cows like Netstar and Altech Autopage are also feeling the pressure of a difficult consumer that's battling to spend some cash. Because of those cash cows are under a little pressure, they need to find more growth areas. They do say that they're going to go going into Africa, and they'll have to make really the right acquisitions into Africa. Otherwise, there'll be more risks to the balance sheet. So they need to find more growth coming out of Altech. The market doesn't really like the numbers. They're down nearly about 3% currently. So they need to find more growth in their model, and maybe acquisitions will be the way forward for them.
Well, while their shares might be down 3%, we have shares in SAB Miller trading 3.5% higher. It came out with a trading statement this morning. Did you take a look at that, Rob?
Briefly looked over it. Looks like very good numbers. The beer volume on average was slightly up. 85% of the earnings come from emerging markets, and the emerging markets were all growth, except for South Africa, which was down 1%. So we saw Asia up 7%. We saw the rest of Africa up 6%. So where they're getting most of their earnings from is where they're getting growth, which is very positive for them. Battling in Europe slightly and battling in the States, down 2% on their volumes there, but overall looking very good, and a very, very positive fourth quarter where we saw some very big jumps in volume. So looking positive for SA Breweries and that growth into Africa. They really are positioned well for recovery in emerging markets.
Of course, that takes us back to Altec, also looking to Africa for growth. So Africa really being targeted by many companies at this point.
Yes, there's obviously a massive population throughout of Africa, and people underestimate it. They also underestimate the spending power that is possible in Africa, and the growth there can be exponential. We also have China coming into Africa as well, which is also adding to the amount of business coming through into Africa. So it is something that all the countries around the world are looking at, and the first people in there, a lot of South African companies and banks are already in that environment. It's very positive for South Africa and Africa as a whole.